for that. And right now we're moving on into our community segment for this Tuesday morning, which means it's time to check in with Mary O'Connell. And she's here for Check Call. Mary, thank you for being here. As we know, being in the logistics space, if you are not a fan of change, this is probably not the industry for you. And just because you're not a fan of it doesn't mean that you have to be afraid of it. Let's talk a little bit about how change can actually be a good thing in this space.
So this is something that we actually dive into a lot today. We dive into kind of specifically the change when it comes to maybe looking at a new TMS or doing something like that. So typically, you get to that point in a business when you really have to kind of work on upgrading. You've maybe outgrown some of your current capabilities or something like that. And so in theory, you should be upgrading some software, upgrading some things to make it obviously better and easier for everyone to do work. But no matter how many times you promise someone, oh, this will be easier, it'll be easier to do, you won't have to waste as much time, you're still going to have to do some change, and it is uncomfy, and not a lot of people don't end up liking it because, you've essentially changed how they operate and how they do things.
Yeah, so that's where I was going to go with this, because obviously you're going to get holdouts. You're going to get people that are going to throw a tantrum and say, we've always done it this way. It's efficient. I understand it. I don't want to do anything else. How do you deal very nicely with these people in terms of trying to get them to buy into whatever you're trying to sell them in terms of a TMS or perhaps some other new type of technology?
I think it depends on a couple different ways. You're always going to have those who are resistant to change. You're always going to have those that maybe don't love what is promised. But I think one of the easiest ways to get through that, especially if you have the time early on, to include them. Simply just include them. Say, hey, look, we're thinking about getting a new TMS. What is something that you would like? What is something that you have that you deal with every day that's a massive pain point for you that you would like to not have to deal with anymore? Whether that's, spending 4 hours calling drivers asking for ETAs, or something as simple as an automatic BOL, assigned BOL notification. Something is just finding out what everybody wants and saying, hey, we found something that can do that, or we found something that's close to what you want, and just really get people involved early. You don't need to have the entire company in those TMS meetings, but maybe an employee representative here, or just have those conversations with people early, so that way there is less resistance later on.
So, of course, Mary, when it comes to talking about change in this industry, we all like to throw the boomers under the bus, right? We all like to talk about how, well, our senior management, our senior leadership is still in that kind of golden generation where they think this is the way that we've always done it, so this is how we're always going to do it. But the reality is that we're seeing a lot more of your younger folks, your kind of middle to younger millennials, start to move into some of these decision-making processes and these decision-making roles, which gives you a little bit more flexibility and acceptance and openness to change. But then that also begs the question, how do you balance that really fine line between, okay, we're changing too much versus we're not changing enough?
I think it really comes down to, kind of assessing what your business needs, knowing, okay, well, we're going through a massive growth spree. Okay, so if that's the case, maybe let's change the least amount of things possible. So really just kind of making sure that you're constantly reassessing and making sure that, these decisions are best for your company, because you don't want to make a change and then realize it's negatively impacting everyone. And then, yes, sometimes you do have to change back, but ultimately making a decision and sticking with it for a set period of time is going to be the best thing. Because if you say, all right, we're going to put in change A and we're going to monitor it for 6 months, and if after 6 months we still like it, then we'll keep it. And after that, no. Because if you set those clear windows, then it's not just changing for the sake of changing. It's making sure that everyone's actually fully on board and it is an appropriate change. And, you've given those who are less technologically adept time to learn and understand the process. So it's more than just, someone didn't catch on in the first month or two. It's really giving it a chance. But yeah, I would definitely say that there's a lot of room in an organization, especially as, some younger generations get into leadership, where there is that decision fatigue, or that decision analysis paralysis, where they can't necessarily make a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, when you look at a situation where you have a new TMS coming in or a new piece of technology, and you talk to your people and say, well, we're trying to get something, and maybe that thing isn't even close to perhaps what one or more of your employees was really looking for, and they do have to train in order to kind of get up on the new system, whatever it is that it may be. How important then is it to have the training, especially right then and there, to have these people get up to speed quickly, so at least they understand new processes in an immutable and efficient fashion, so they can get online quickly?
I think training is honestly the most important part. If you have for example, if you have a TMS provider that, they are just like, okay, well, here's your TMS. We're integrated. Call me if it breaks. Like, no, that's not what you should be looking for in your TMS provider. You should have someone that will facilitate that training, has maybe some training documentation, or can work with your internal training team to make sure that all that documentation is supported and that they're there for one-on-one coaching with some who maybe are struggling with certain things or just, not quite picking up as quickly as others. So I definitely say, when you come to an implementation or you come to, implementing a new change, I wouldn't say base the timeline off of the average. I would base it off of some of your slower people, because it's just the nature of business. You're going to have people who catch on in a day or two, and you're going to have people that are going to take a couple of weeks, and that's completely fine. It's just a matter of planning for that and knowing, because you don't want to say, oh, we're going to do this in a week, and then half the team takes a week or two to get their feet wet and get their feet underneath them to get started and get going. That's just setting yourself up for failure. So I would definitely say, when you're planning out your timelines for any sort of change that you're implementing, whether it's a new TMS or a new policy or a new way of doing things, I would definitely plan it around some of the middle to slower adapters.
So, Mary, of course, change is costly in that time perspective, like you just mentioned, but it can also be costly from a financial perspective. And that's another thing that is really difficult in some of that leadership, is choosing when to implement some dollars into making changes. Do you have any big 3 red flags that would tell you, no, you're not quite ready to financially invest in a big change?
I would say if you're just doing it because everyone else is doing it, that's a pretty big red flag. If you can't point to any one thing that says this, I have this problem and this change will still solve it, and potentially another one and another problem it will solve, I would say maybe don't, because at that point in time, then you have to look at how big is that change and how much is that change costing you, because that will determine if, you just need to get in one system, or if maybe you need to wait and find something that can solve multiple problems, because that's how you end up getting, 10 different systems that you have to go through just to book one load, because we're just solving one problem at a time instead of potentially a root issue. So I would definitely say, boil down to what the real core issue is, how much of it can be solved by, internal training or reviewing your processes, because that's mostly free when you do it. And so it's really, I would say just, you really got to look at what the business needs and how much, or basically that expected ROI that you get on this change. And is it going to come in a month? Is it going to come in 3 months? Is it going to come in 2 years? It's something that you need to look at before you even start looking at any sort of change in a process.
This is definitely one of my favorite questions, no matter the industry, dealing with change on a broad scale. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, the show later today. Newsletter when?
The newsletter also comes out later today at 2:00. So right after you finish Tech Call, just, go grab some lunch, and the newsletter will be right in your inbox.
All right, Mary, thank you for that. Looking forward to your show this afternoon.